Let's go into the next segment about no more trans people in the military. The military isn't about personal identity, folks. It's about defending the country. And for so long, it's been this like experiment with the military to like use it as like this crazy woke DEI experiment at the expense of our national security. But not any longer. When I think of a soldier, I think of strength. I think of discipline and readiness to fight. But today, we're being told that denying biological reality in the military is inclusive, that lowering standards is progress. Meanwhile, we are watching our enemies grow stronger. And I don't know about you, but I look around at the average male these days, not trying to judge, but just trying to observe the fruit. And I'm thinking, if we have to put these men together to form a military branch or to form an army or a militia, we're toast. We got some work to do. The question is, are we building a fighting force or a social experiment? Let's try to pull up clip 1 about the transgender military members being targeted by Trump's executive order. And if you can't pull it up, then I will.
Trans people are ready to serve. I am here ready to serve, and there's thousands like me that are serving in our capacities.
Logan Ireland and his wife Layla are both transgender. Layla is also a retired Army veteran.
The military is extremely tasked with defending our country and protecting all Americans. So banning a group of people from serving our country puts us all at a greater risk.
Under the new executive order, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has 60 days to change the military standards on who is allowed to serve. The military is also now banned from using identification-based pronouns, and service members must use the sleeping and bathroom quarters of the sex they were born as.
Now, there are still a lot of unknowns here. President Biden had previously signed an executive order saying transgender people in the military and use health care coverage for gender-affirming care. President Trump's executive order overturns all of that. But it still remains to be seen how exactly the policies will change over the next 60 days.
That's huge. And it's like crazy because I'm just thinking of all of these images, bro. I don't know if you're able to pull up one while I'm talking, but there's literally like images of like people dressed like dogs in the military. Like it's become an absolute clown show. And I'm not trying to say that to be rude to people who are like, you know, really struggling with their identity and all that sort of stuff. I want to be as compassionate as possible, man. Like, I get it. I was lost. I didn't know who I was. Granted, I didn't think I was a dog, but I didn't know I was lost without Jesus. The challenge, though, is that when the whole point of the military is to defend the country from foreign attack and invasion, right? And when we're lowering the standards of what the expectation is, and we're more concerned about offending somebody in the military because we're not using a pronoun that they would prefer, I'm thinking like the whole picture of going through basic training. Actually, you got to come back on, Anderson. You got to talk about this. I know you're looking for that image. I'll try to find it. But I want you to come back on because you're actually a Marine. So this is interesting about you, bro. So like you're a first generation immigrant from Venezuela, and you're also a Marine. So you have an interesting background when it comes to weighing in on these things.
Not a Venezuelan Marine.
Not a Venezuelan, but you're a first generation immigrant from Venezuela, and you're an American Marine. United States Marine Corps. Hoorah. Amazing. Thank you for your service.
Rah.
What do you think about this?
We're going to hear a little bit about Rob Smith on combat readiness, but I'll give you a little story. When I graduated boot camp 2005, I'm kind of displaying a little bit of my age here, but 2005, I served from 2005 to 2017, 12 years 9 years active duty, 3 years reserve. One of the things that you go through when you first get to your first duty station is that they're doing certain procedures, right? Certain things like pulling your wisdom teeth out. Interestingly enough, if you don't have those out, you're not combat ready. And I was doing my best not to be emotionally entangled with this particular story, Kap. But the problem that we're seeing is how is, for the lack of better terms, a transgender person combat ready? And the answer is they're not. They're not deployable. They're essentially they're going to be on this life support, for the lack, again, of better terms, in terms of disability for life. So now you have a service member who's not combat ready, who's not deployable, who's costing a ton of money to the government, which is us, taxpayers, and they're not even doing their primary function. And that to me is a problem. Regardless of where you sit in the political aisle, that's a major issue across the board. Here's a couple of things that I like to break down before you go into the second video, Cap. There are two things. One is the executive order that Trump signed, and then the other one is the previous policy. So under Trump's executive order, there is a declaration essentially of individuals who do not meet the rigorous standards of the military cannot fulfill for their duties. They're not part of that combat force. Therefore, a lot of those individuals that are unfortunately transgender and they did their surgery either on while in the military or before, they're going to have to get out because they're not combat ready. They're not able to keep up with the standards. A couple of other things in there, they have 60 days to get out. And that's going to create a lot of controversy. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits going down the pipeline. And there's going to be a lot of different things that people are going to be, unfortunately, crying about. And then the other portion is their facilities. They have to make accommodations for transgender individuals in these facilities. Even though it's a very small minority, now the facilities are going to be equipped to facilitate your necessities to your gender of birth, or your sex of birth. So if you were born a female, you're going to go into the locker rooms and into the bathrooms and into the facilities that are assigned to you at birth. In contrast to the previous administration, we're looking at it was open to transgender service members. It was, taxpayer funded. So we paid for all those surgeries on an individual that cannot perform their duties. They can do a lot of supporting roles, Cap, but we know if something was to break down, we have to go in there. And then the other portion is they're going to eliminate anything regarding self-identifying pronouns, which I found that silly, but I'm excited. I think a lot of my buddies who have gotten out, a lot of my buddies who are in right now, once again, they're trying to accommodate for a small minority, and it doesn't make them combat ready, and that's kind of the primary function. That's why you went into the military. So in any given notice, you're going to go and fight for the country.
I'm going to share this clip from Rob Smith that you mentioned, and he's a former military. He's a veteran, and he's also a guy who identifies in the LGBT community. So obviously, I don't agree with that lifestyle, but does that limit him from being able to serve the country? I don't think it's the same argument. Because what you're talking, we'll let him explain. But I think there's a difference between people who are medically dependent on these drugs in order to continue, this lifestyle, versus someone who has a private life that really it's none of anybody's business. So let's listen to what he has to say.
So President Trump said that he is going to ban transgender people from the United States military, and the TQ left is all up in arms about this. So I'm going to give you a couple of facts that a lot of people do not know about trans in the military. Number one, every single transgender person that is in the United States military is non-combat deployable. What that means is that they cannot deploy to a combat theater. Why is that? Because of their constant heavy medicalization. Nobody that requires that much constant medical attention can be deployed to a combat theater. Now, you've got transgender people that are on hormones that have the surgery. You've got the female to male transgenders that are on testosterone, all of that stuff. You can't deploy to a combat theater with that constant need for medicalization. Number two, the vast majority of trans people that get into the military medically separate. What that means is that they medically separate because of that transgender identity. A lot of them are separating to the tune of 70 to 80%, if not more, disability. What that means is that they get health care for the transgender medical issues in perpetuity through the VA, which is funded by who? The United States taxpayer. Maybe that's something that Doge can look at. And number three, the vast majority of transgender people, number one, they have something called gender dysphoria. That is a mental thing that is on, it used to be on one of the lists of things that you literally cannot enter the military as having. There are people that can't enter the military for all sorts of medical reasons. You can't even get into the United States military if you have flat feet. All right. I had to get a waiver for my flat feet when I got into the military, right?
Wow.
So those are things that a lot of people do not realize about transgender people in the military. And one more thing that I'm going to put in is that a lot of these people, like I said, that medically separate and that get health care from the VA in perpetuity means that the VA is on the hook for these people medically for the rest of their lives. This is to the tune of tens of millions of dollars every year from the United States taxpayer. These are things that people do not realize when you talk about trans people in the military, because a lot of people do not have the military experience and cannot talk to these issues in the ways that they need to be able to. So I think that our incoming Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is going to do something about this. And I know, and I have a lot of faith that all of our elected Republican officials will be able to speak to these things eloquently and will be able to make the case for enacting President Trump's agenda when the inevitable pushback comes from the left, and it will come.
I don't really know what there is to disagree with on that personally. You can let me know what you think in the comments, but I just think it's interesting that it was something that would keep you from actually performing in the military before completely. And then there was like all sorts of provision, like basically bending the military around it. And Pete Hegseth's coming in strong, man. So he was just sworn in for the Secretary of Defense, which is going to be refreshing. It's going to be refreshing to know that the military is no longer going to be a social experiment, but it's going to do what it's set out to do, to create a lethal force of peace through strength in the earth, which is what we need right now, especially as a country. And I'm here for it, man. And from a biblical perspective, I'm grateful, Anderson, that we have a president that is standing up for what the Word of God says plainly about the difference between male and female. Hey, if you enjoyed this clip and you want to see another one like it, you can click the video over here. And if you want to watch a full episode of the Kap Chatfield Show, you can click this one right here.